Tranter, the Event Director for Manufacturing and Engineering Week, and welcome to the Manufacturing and Engineering Podcast. Each one of these sessions will be dedicated to speaking to a real influencer in the industry, a leader, be it in the association side, from government, in industry, talking about innovation, opportunity, the challenges and the strengths of UK manufacturing. So make sure you join us. Our first guest on Manufacturing and Engineering Podcast is Juergen Maier CBE. Juergen is known to everyone. He is a leading industrialist, having advised government and led as the chief exec of the Siemens Group of companies in the UK for many years. He's the co-chair of Made Smarter, the vice chair of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, and the chairman of the Digital Catapult. And we're delighted to have him here to talk to us today. So, Juergen Maier CBE, thank you so much for joining us. Lovely to have you on the podcast. I was reminiscing the other day of one of the classic times that I met with you, and you and Will Butler-Adams from Brompton doing a Le Mans start to folded bikes with cycling clips and helmets and all, racing around Manchester Central for a press conference. Do you remember that one?
I most definitely do. Always nice to inject a bit of fun, isn't it? But of course, the purpose was to talk about the wonderful manufacturing processes of Brompton bikes. But yeah, it was great fun. I remember it well.
Yeah, no, he's a fantastic chap, Will, and a great innovator, and one of the real British success stories in engineering and manufacturing, I think.
Totally.
We're going to be talking about a lot of different topics. There's so much ground to cover considering we only have you for a short period of time and you've got so much that you can share. So one of the things is we've just had the announcement, we are emerging officially from the pandemic. Freedom Day has been announced. How is manufacturing poised to return? How's that going to impact us as an industry?
The first thing to say is, yes, it is Freedom Day, but, I think it's freedom with caution, isn't it? And I think manufacturing will stay responsible in terms of how the staff can stay safe. And indeed, I think the first thing also to say is how just tremendous manufacturing have been throughout the pandemic. People just take it for granted that all of the products we need have continued to flow pretty much seamlessly. And we often forget the manufacturing and the amazing engineering and the supply chains that sit behind that. In terms of how it goes forward, the way I reflect on it is that, despite the horrible things that the pandemic has, of course, brought, it is also an incredible change moment. And if you, as a company, were trying to get everybody to work more flexibly and to work more remotely, and you wanted to create the moment that initiated that change, you would find it incredibly hard. Everybody would be finding excuses as to, why working virtually and on platforms like we're doing now isn't possible. And actually, this pandemic has given us that opportunity. It forced us into that change. So one of the things that I hope is that we keep on to some of the positive that comes out of that change. And with that is not just, of course, the digital adoption of talking on platforms like you and I are now, but it's how do you in factories get better at remotely monitoring your machinery and keeping it running more efficiently? How do you plan your factory layouts completely virtually and offline and simulate it in a digital twin and share that with people in a virtual environment? I mean, the way that some of these things have accelerated during the pandemic has been quite unbelievable. And I absolutely hope we can hold on to that and continue to accelerate those sorts of digital technologies that bring great productivity advantages.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there's been so much innovation. I mean, when you look back to the government called for help, we need ventilators, we need things to be in place. And who did they reach out to? They reached out to manufacturing and engineering. And my word, did they respond. I mean, the delivery was incredible, the speed with which they did it. the sacrifice in the way that they did it and said, this isn't about us making money or about the publicity. This is about helping the country, and we were ready and able to gear up for that, which is an incredible thing. And that fast-paced transition is what we need to see more of. So when we're looking at that, we're coming out officially, as we say, out of the pandemic, we hope. We are in a position where maybe manufacturers and engineering companies have started to think about innovation in a way that they didn't before because of necessity. And we know necessity is the mother of invention. So what do we think now? What do you think are the opportunities that UK manufacturing has in its path, and how can they best be taking advantage of them?
Yeah, and and there are some great opportunities, and and let's really hold on to those. Now, I mean, the first one is that there is an opportunity in localization, and I don't always believe that forcing things to be local is the right way to drive things, because international competition is also good to drive innovation. But there are certain activities that the pandemic has taught us that you just need local. And obviously, the vaccines is a key example of that, and I do think in response to that, the life sciences I'll call it an industrial strategy, even though government is calling it something else now. But just last week we saw a life sciences strategy being launched, and with the opportunity to try and repeat that sort of, what else like vaccines could we really be the innovators and the creators of and manufacture locally? And of course, now on vaccines, you think it's all biotech and laboratories, but behind it are things like the vials that the vaccines go in, and actually the UK had no production of any vials at all, and so if you're relying on international supply chains for that, it could prevent you from responding to a pandemic. So great opportunity for glass manufacturers, and by goodness, of course the UK can make vials competitively, but that's just one example. So there's that sort of localization in terms of what we need locally. This is not everything, but certain things I think is a key agenda. And then I think there are two broader topics, and one is industrial digital technology adoption, which is what Made Smarter, that I think we'll talk about a little bit in a moment, is all about. And indeed, the pandemic has taught many companies that such technology is really useful, like virtual planning of factories and better digital supply chain planning and connectivity, and also in the factory more use of robotics and these sorts of technologies. So I think to really see if we can keep on that journey and create a step change in terms of the adoption of these advanced technologies, so that we are more competitive, more productive, can export more. So I think that's the second area. And the third area is doing all of that in a much more net zero, and in a much more sustainable, and in a much more circular economy way as well. And again, it's interesting how the pandemic has really shone a light on how important that is. And I think it's so important that as we create new factories, as we digitize and automate existing factories, that we always do what we do with a view to making the production process and the output more sustainable.
Yeah, and I think net zero is obviously a huge topic for everybody. It's at the top of everyone's agenda, but it's also difficult. How's that going to happen? How is government going to put things in place to enable that to happen? As you mentioned, we're going to talk about Made Smarter a little bit later, but that kind of innovation in the way that you approach manufacturing and engineering is going to be critical to that change and that green economy that we all need. I mean, it's a global imperative. We have to face it and fight it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think, all too often when we talk about sustainability, we end up talking about the energy sources. And of course, that's critical, and we need more, offshore wind, and in houses we need more ground source heat pumps and these sorts of things. But what we don't talk enough about is the consumption of energy in our manufacturing processes. Now look, manufacturing is always going to be requiring energy of forms, but can some of that be provided with hydrogen? And certainly steel industry is thinking about that. Glass industry we mentioned earlier is thinking about that. So, and then of course it's just the optimization generally of factory processes, all of which can lead to lower energy consumption. So I think we've got to throw a much stronger priority on that for sure.
Yeah. And then obviously where there's opportunity, there's, we normally talk about there's challenges and then there's opportunities. We've talked about opportunities. I don't want to be the one that mentions the B word, but obviously there are also challenges facing manufacturing and engineering at the moment. What do you think the biggest issues facing us are as we come out and try and seize these opportunities? What's the big issue there?
Well, I mean, I'm not someone that wants to, go over all ground on Brexit. I think everybody is now clear that, it has put cost into supply chains. It has put cost into manufacturing businesses. So, for manufacturing, broadly speaking, especially for those who are exporters or who are supplying companies that are exporters, it's not been particularly helpful. Having said that, what any sort of change like that does is it focuses the mind on productivity. So I have seen sort of this double whammy of COVID and Brexit has forced companies to think about productivity and how do I offset some of the increasing costs that I've now got in my business, and how can I offset those? And of course, that often leads you to automation, advanced digital technologies that we were talking about earlier. So look, I'm not going to try and present Brexit as some great advantage, but it has created an impetus, and it means that all of the other things that we were talking about become even more important.
Yeah, and I think that's true of how the sector has performed generally. I mean, a lot of people still don't realise, obviously the people listening to this are not going to be amongst them, but amongst the general public, that we're the 9th biggest manufacturer on the planet is I asked friends who aren't involved in this sector at all, where do you think we sit? And they were like, 50th, 100th. Do we even do any manufacturing? And it seems like you and I have had this conversation like over 10 or more years, and yet still there is still somehow that perception. And I think that leads to one of the challenges seemingly that never goes away is that skills issue. It's how are we going to be filling the funnel, bringing people through, and within that skills agenda as well, of course, it's not just the shortage of people, but it's diversity. It's the amount of women coming into engineering, and how are we going to encourage that? So it seems like a topic that's been there for a very long time. But what have you seen in your experience that has really made a difference, and what would you kind of advocate for people to be doing to try and so that we can all be playing a part to make that difference there?
Yeah, I mean, very important topic, both the overall sort of perception of manufacturing and the skills that we attract to manufacturing. Of course, those two are very linked as well. And look, these things don't change overnight. However, if you sort of play it back over a longer period and you think about when we were having this conversation 10 years ago to where they are now, I do think there has been a change. And I actually think COVID has increase that awareness of the fact of how important manufacturing is, that the distribution and the manufacture of vaccines was so critical to us being able to get to where we are. And I think those things have helped. And I think the other thing that has focused the mind is the fact that people are now seeing that we are again in a real transition of industry. So, a little bit like when I grew up in northern England in Leeds and saw the demise of the old, coal mines and old steel industries and, and the old car industries, for example, if we can say that, to the new. And quite frankly, we didn't do a very good job at transitioning to the new industries that came, like semiconductors, for example. We didn't really embrace those. And people are now seeing, my goodness, we're now seeing, the next wave of industry. So, the car manufacturing we have today having to transition to electric cars or maybe hydrogen cars, the remaining of what we have of gas power and to needing to transition to maybe hydrogen. And people are realizing that, my goodness, we need to create the jobs. We can't just lose the old and not create the new. So I think there is more realization of this, but it's still a challenge, and I do think we need, as a nation, I think we need to be bolder, and as part of that boldness needs to be the alignment of the skill system, and and I'm particularly thinking of further education and apprenticeship schemes to align people into these new industries, which are quite inevitable. And don't get me wrong, I'm seeing that happen. I also think, by the way, that the apprenticeships we have today compared to 10 years ago are way better. They're still not at the quantity we need, but I think the quality is much better than it used to be. But we now need to put stronger ambition and scale behind some of these great initiatives.
Yeah, and particularly, you look at the way that, I know it's the one that we always bring up, but if you look at the way that Germany kind of applied itself to that process, and also the respect that the engineering and manufacturing sector has as a career, the perception is, you're right up there with doctors and lawyers and as a serious profession. And I think that feels to me, from my perspective of looking in on manufacturing over the last 10 years or more, seems to be shifting. That kind of view of the I'm not having a child of mine going and working on some, that seems to have finally moved. And the opportunities, some of the careers you can have now are so varied, so engaging, so exciting, and the technologies that people are working on are mind-blowing in comparison to what used to be happening. And that leads us nicely, I think, into what you're doing with Made Smarter, what that Made Smarter initiative is all about, because changing and looking to the future and that transition, it feels like we're at a pivotal point to make a real leap. And Made Smarter is really at the heart of trying to drive that. So can you tell us a bit about what you're doing there?
Yeah, so, and absolutely, it is just worth, just quickly going back to how it started. And it was with a review called the Made Smarter Review in 2017. And our ambition as a group of industry leaders, I just happened to co-chair it with the business secretary, but it's all about the business leadership. And I'm pleased to say it's lots of small and medium and large size companies on board with the initiative. And we had an ambition to make sure we do transition to this fourth industrial revolution, the future of industries like car manufacturing, like the new aerospace manufacturing, but also challenges in pharmaceutical and food and all of the sectors. And we wanted to make that transition much better than we did that transition into the third. I'm pleased with the progress we've been able to make. So we've got some, quite mature programs out there now, particularly in the adoption program. It is still at the moment limited to the Northwest, but we're just beginning to launch, I'm pleased to say, in the Northeast and in the Midlands, and we want to do it in Yorkshire as well. And this is to provide real practical hands-on support to SME businesses in how do I adopt some simple robotics, which doesn't have to cost millions, by the way. This can be an investment for £5,000 for a robot. Yes, there's some extra cost in terms of the system integration, or in how do I get involved in some early data analytics or machine learning for my factory. So helping small to medium-sized companies. We have a mature program rolling out across the country in that regard with support of government and business. We have some very exciting innovation and research programs that are looking at how can we improve the technology that's available for people to optimize their supply chains. That's one key initiative. And another key initiative is how do we help factories optimize in the factory. So that's the whole connectivity of machines using 5G and then using data and data analytics and making all of that very much more flexible. So some very exciting initiatives that all lead ultimately to manufacturers being able to be more productive. And I'm pleased to say we have a skills program around it as well, which helps companies upskill their workforces as they're going through this implementation program. So we're very pleased with some of the progress we've made. But as I said previously, we are now at the point where we need to scale this up. I think we've sort of proven that this works. We've proven that manufacturers get value from the program. And now we're in conversations with industry and government to work at hopefully scaling that up and putting more funding behind it so that the program can go much more national and more ambitious.
No, it sounds very exciting, the stuff that's going on, the changes that are happening. And also, it seems to me that when you look at the kind of the positioning from government, the way that they talk about, we are in what is now a post-Brexit, post-pandemic economy for the UK. We are governing ourselves in the way that we voted for, and now we have to act on that. There's this talk of a bold, bright future, and we have to find something to kind of hang our hat on. This is what we're going to drive forward. And it seems to me that manufacturing and engineering and our place there in terms of export, in terms of trade, all of those different things has to be at the forefront of that. That has to be the driving area that brings that growth, that brings that innovation, both from inward investment, making sure that Britain is open for business, reshoring of business that is possibly being manufactured elsewhere, but just creating a kind of an environment that it makes it a rich place for us to actually build industry. And do you feel we're poised for that? Do you feel that's an opportunity that is waiting to happen for Britain?
Well, I mean, there is definitely the better understanding by government and by industry that this is what we need to do. I think we've put a lot of the building blocks in place, such as a Made Smarter program. I think the way that we've developed the catapults, I chair the Digital Catapult, which is doing great work in the advanced manufacturing space. We, of course, have the High Value Manufacturing Catapult that does great work. So we've invested significantly in some of these building blocks and these parts of our infrastructure. And now is the time to really scale those up to help create those industries that you're talking about. I mean, I think the other thing that speaks for us is that this government have also really put their promise behind levelling up and regions. In the north, in the West Midlands, and actually it is very much those regions which rely more proportionately very often on advanced manufacturing and technology businesses. So quite frankly, true levelling up can't really happen in many of those regions unless manufacturing is a key part of that levelling up strategy.
Yeah. Well, I think there's going to be a lot of change coming, and I think it'll be exciting times. But in the meantime, really appreciate your time today, Juergen. I know how precious that is, and for your valuable insights. Just thank you very much for being on the programme.
It's my absolute pleasure, and my time is always available for supporting our fabulous UK manufacturing sector, and thank you also for supporting it.
No, thank you. Thank you for joining the Manufacturing and Engineering podcast. I hope you found it useful and interesting and thought-provoking. We'll be running a number of these sessions over the coming weeks and months, so make sure you subscribe at the usual podcast channels. Watch out for our YouTube channel and just keep an eye out on LinkedIn and through our media partners. Hope to see you again.